Good afternoon. I bring you greetings from Morton, Wooley's family, and the thanks to each one of you for coming together for this time of remembrance. It is a time that each of us will have the thoughts of many opportunities we have had to enjoy Morton's kindness, goodness, and grace as we have trod this earth together. It has been something that we have all looked to, and we have enjoyed our time with Morton, whether it has been in the course of his teaching, his being a practicing surgeon, his being interested in the community and individuals, and as he has been an active participant in our community, whether it be in Loma or Glendale or on the desert or earlier in Worthington and Denver and in Atlanta. And so we gather together here to remember this person that we found to be a help in so many ways, and to whom we felt a kinship, and that he always would care for us and never would make fun or be a person to put us down. Morton was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He lived across the country. He had a wife whom he dearly loved, children who were special to him, and a host of patients and friends that he looked to as very special people, and to whom they felt that he was a kind and loving person. Now today, as we move ahead with this service of remembrance, many of you will think of times that you have been the recipient of his grace and his love. So we will proceed today with the program that is in your hands without further introduction. And we will remember this child of God who developed early an understanding of how much we can do for each other, and who throughout his 95 years has exercised this spirit in many ways. If you will join me in a prayer of thanksgiving for the life of Morton Murray Wooley. Dear Lord, we pause to thank you for having given us a person of understanding, of thoughtfulness, of genuine concern and love to be a part of our community and our lives. We experienced the help the strength that he often brought to each one of us. And he was one who always thought of how he could be of help. We are thankful that we have had Morton in our lives, and we thank you for his life, and we pledge to you that that same love for fellow man, that same indication of service will be something that will continue to be exercised as we move ahead. We ask these things in Jesus' name. And as we have remembered that we repeat, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
I'm reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 33 to 42. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. Whoever is not against us is for us. For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose his reward."
There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore in the shall sing on that beautiful shore the melodious songs of the blessed, and our spirit shall sorrow no more. Not a sigh for the blessing of rest in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore.
Thank you, Bob and Jerry and Don. Morton enjoyed your music greatly. Last month, Morton Murray Wooley, MD, passed away following a prolonged illness. He was surrounded by his loving family and cradled in the snow-capped Idaho mountains that he loved so well. 94 years of a life had flown by, filled with professional accomplishments, teaching awards, administrative leadership, surgical prowess of the highest level. Equally important was the intertwinement of his involvement with family and friends and his participation in sporting events in the great outdoors. Morton was born in Atlanta, 1924. His mother was Mary Beatrice Murray, and his father, Andrew Price Wooley. His name Morton came from his uncle, who had just passed away from tuberculosis as a young man in Georgia. And of course, Murray was his mother's maiden name. The Murrays and the Wooleys were two strong Southern Methodist families, and I mean strong. Morton was lucky. He got the best genes from both families. He was the youngest of 4 children. He had an oldest sister, Mary Virginia, who was 18 years old when he was born. His brother Andy was age 9, and he had a sister, Anna, who had died at age 4 in 1918, before his birth, from the measles at age 4. Her death and mother's subsequent depression led to a search for comfort and religious doctrine that resulted in the mother converting to Adventism. Morton's father remained a Methodist all his life. During the first 8 years of Morton's life, Morton would attend Sabbath School with his mother on Saturday and then attend Methodist Sunday School with Dad on Sunday, and would sit and listen to his father, who taught Sunday school each Sunday. Now, those of you who can remember back a little bit, Morton spent a good bit of his adult life teaching a Sabbath school each Saturday. And it was a contemporary Sabbath school where he would draw from, you never knew where he was going to draw from. It was sometimes the Old Testament, and sometimes it was Desire of Ages, and sometimes it was I'm okay, you're okay. But you knew that if you went to his class, you were going to get something useful and practical. In 1933, at the age of 8, Morton, enduring the financial depression, as you may know, his beloved father died, leaving the family with their pride but little else. Encouraged by an older sister, the family moved to Worthington, Ohio, where Morton became a student athlete of the highest type, playing basketball and track, and being an academic excellent student. In 1942, with World War II unfolding, he finished high school in just 3 years and enrolled in college, Otterbein College. College was interrupted when he enlisted as a naval aviation cadet in December of 1943, as you saw in some of those pictures. The next 2 years were full of training, and he was awaiting orders, probably for the invasion of Japan, when the war ended in August of 1945. With the war's end, the 21-year-old Morton focused like a laser on medicine. He finished 2 years of college in 1 year and was accepted in medical school. It was medicine that he found his true calling. He loved it. As one of the few single medical students entering the College of Medical Evangelists in 1947, he would often spend Saturday night in the emergency room asking overworked, blurry-eyed interns if it would be okay if he helped work up some of the new patients coming in. Well, the interns and residents were more than happy to give him that opportunity, and he soaked in the teaching and self-study that made him a mature, outstanding student, president of his graduating class of 1951. After graduation, he went to a surgical residency at LA County Hospital, and there his path crossed with another resident training there, Emma Jane Griffith, MD. They wed in 1955, forming a most enviable partnership for the next 64 years. They were the love of each other's lives, and their love remained undimmed with the passage of time. In our family, it wasn't Morton anymore, it was Morton and Jane. Pediatric surgeons were a small group in the 1950s. And Morton, for his subspecialty training, chose to go to the Mecca, Boston Children's, with Dr. Robert E. Gross, MD, finishing in 1959. He then returned to Los Angeles, where he was in private practice, and then joined the faculty at the University of Southern California, where he rapidly and swiftly went up the ranks to professor of surgery and then surgeon-in-chief at Los Angeles Children's Hospital until his retirement in 1991. Throughout his decades of practice and teaching, he mentioned he had a heavy surgical schedule, taught residents, medical students, helped establish professional organizations like the American Pediatric Surgical Association and the Pacific Association of Pediatric Surgeons. He served as president of both those organizations. Morton traveled extensively, as we saw on those slides, consulting with developing countries, helping them beef up their surgical infrastructures, academic training settings, and supporting former trainees who were in their native lands. Was Morton a good surgeon? He was a great surgeon. While technically precise and efficient, and with low infection rates, the clincher was that he had a presence about him. You just knew that when he arrived in a critical situation, things were going to be okay. And from little children to anxious grandparents, all responded to this presence that I am sure greatly improved his outcomes. I am sure that many of you probably can attest to that presence of Morton. I mentioned before that Morton was an athlete. Tall and strong, he effortlessly mastered skiing, tennis, golf, basketball, any sport he chose to pursue, and integrated them into his family and social life in a way that was just wonderfully inclusive. Morton's love for his family was monumental. In spite of his heavy professional responsibilities, time with his family was sacred. From the time they were 9 years old, Cynthia and Doug and Jim would accompany him on lecture trips, and you saw all those trips that he was in foreign countries, and Asia, Soviet Union, Mexico. And a library of Super 8 films shows all the fun that they had. He is survived by his loving wife, Jane, children, Cynthia, Doug, and Jim, grandchildren, Hillary and Price, as well as many nieces, nephews, grandnieces, and grandnephews. Morton struggled with Alzheimer's disease during the last years of his life. Even with the ravages of this disorder, he thoughtfully left us slowly. Critically important during this challenging time was the loving support of Jane, who kept him active and involved, with the loving assistance provided by their children. A year and a half ago, Jane and Morton hosted my brother George and Joan, Sally and I, and Jim for a dinner, or a lunch actually, in Rancho Mirage. As we began the meal, Morton kind of smiled and looked around and said, "Does everyone know everyone?" And then at the end of the meal, "Has everyone had enough?" Even with the fog of his disease clouding his cognition, he still had the gentle, kind touch that made you feel welcome and confirmed that you were in the presence of an extraordinary man. Sometimes families are given a gift, not necessarily deserved, but received with gratitude. Morton was such a gift. He was a world-class surgeon, a teacher, an author of scientific information, but it was to his family and friends that he gave the best gifts. He showed us how to be kind and loving to children and take good care of them. He gave good advice when asked for it. He showed us that you needn't be perfect to be loved. He was quick to forgive. And he was a Christian gentleman who loved Christ, his fellow man, and his family. I am a better person and our family greatly enriched for having known and loved him. Our family, his friends, his colleagues, and the innumerable people to whom he has ministered are all fortunate to have been in the extended family of Dr. Morton Murray Wooley.
The first time I ever saw Mort Wooley was July 5th, 1954. I was the new at Los Angeles County Hospital. I was the new intern. Mort was the senior surgery resident. It was orientation day. And I was starting my internship on general surgery. Mort's job that day was to orient the new interns taking surgery on how to admit a patient. Well, the orientation went on forever for the entire intern class. We had to learn all the things we were supposed to do and not supposed to do, and how to navigate the big county hospital. Finally, late in the afternoon, we separated for our little groups so we could learn what we were going to do the next day. Well, I walked into this room and saw this tall, handsome guy in scrubs. And he started talking, and he was very articulate, and he seemed pretty smart. Well, I was really intrigued, so I decided I needed to find out more about him. My research revealed that he was single, good. He had good judgment, that was good. He was a capable surgeon, that was good. He was a Southern gentleman, very good. And he typed his progress notes. Well, I decided I was going to have to do something to get to know him. So I found somebody that was willing to take a month of psychiatry for me in exchange for his month of burns with Mort Wooley. So I loved the burn service. Mort was so patient, such a good teacher. I learned how to do skin grafts, how to debride third-degree burns, how to manage nutrition and fluids with these patients. One day on rounds, we went by the mailboxes to pick up our meager checks. Mort opened his, handed it to me, and said, "How would you like to help me spend it?" Well, I did help him spend it. And every check after that for the next 64 years. We were married July 24th, 1955. In all those years, I was constantly amazed at how much he loved me and our children, how much he loved children in general, and how much they loved him back. His kindness and consideration for everybody, his wisdom, his integrity, his sense of humor, his leadership, his humility, and all the things he did to make the world a better place. I called him my brilliant husband. As for me, the most brilliant thing I ever did was to get rid of that psychiatry month so I could spend that time getting to know that wonderful man who became my life partner, my best friend, and the love of my life.
I want to thank you all for coming to the celebration of my father's life. So who is this man, Morton Wooley, who we're celebrating today? He had a lot of names: Dr. Wooley, Professor Wooley, Mort, Honey, and for me, he was just Dad. One of my favorite philosophers, Theodore Geisel, in his iconic book, The Cat in the Hat, said, look at me, look at me, look at me now. It's fun to have fun, but you have to know how." My dad always knew how to have fun, and he had his finger next to the fun button all of his life. One could tell by his smile. My dad had a long list of things that made him smile: tennis, golf, skiing, water and snow, bicycling, world travel, dirt bikes, the symphony, theater, the theater. Superseding all of these was time he spent with his family. He was always happy to see us and wanted to experience our lives with him. My dad and little children have an amazing dynamic. It's almost like they can feel each other's presence in a room. He could not resist stopping and chatting with children everywhere. It's almost like they had their own language. Even during the 3 years I had the privilege of taking care of him, he still maintained that amazing magnetism. At that moment, it seemed like they were exactly on the same plane. In thinking about my dad, I came on a word, probity. Probity means integrity, uprightness, and honesty, and living in it. Everyone thinks they have integrity, but as Paul says in Romans 7:15 and 16, for what I am doing I do not understand, and for what I am practicing I do not like to do, but I'm doing the very thing that I hate. I believe my dad lived with this in his heart. He fought hard to be congruent, and through his model, I can often ask myself, are my feet and my mouth in the same place? My dad's integrity showed in his behavior. He always acted like someone who was paying attention to the actions and behaved accordingly. Time with his family was his top priority. I think he made every decision in his life with his family needs and wants in mind. Motorcycle trips to the desert, world travel, and projects around the house, from building a go-kart to building and maintaining a chicken coop. Then after working crazy hours, I remember we'd get into our camper with the boat in tow to embark on a 12-hour drive to Shasta or Powell. Then he'd jump behind the wheel of the boat, driving for all the kids until they got worn out. He let me drive when I was very small. I still fondly remember the feeling of those 88 horses thrashing in the water. He never complained about anything. He had lots of names for me as well. Jimbo was early on, and later on in his dimension, I was his brother. I was his nephew. And at times, I was the boys. He would ask my mom, where are the boys? When he called me James Morton, I knew I had a growth opportunity. One such time was in junior high. My glee club went to Disneyland for a performance, and while wandering around the park, my friend and I stole a little souvenir. My dad, his dad, my friend, and I all got to go to return the booty to Disneyland. Our 1-hour drive and the embarrassment of the process was excruciatingly painful. I would have liked to see my dad's integrity to just ground me for a month rather than having to go face the mouse. He lived his life with great intention. Everything he chose to do, he did well. He was never afraid to ask for advice and be coached. But he was always my dad first.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. Richard, you did a fine job of describing Dad's spectacular career, so I don't have to do that. But even before I knew what he did when he left home, when I was just a little tyke, he was just Dad. Like other dads, he carried me on his shoulders, tossed me around in the pool, took us to all sorts of fun places, showed me what other dads showed their sons, how to drill a hole, turn a screw, change a tire, that sort of thing. But it wasn't until one afternoon after church at the White Memorial that I learned what else he could do. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and he was working at the White Memorial Hospital at the time. I was playing with some other kids out on the lawn, and I tore my forehead open on a tree. And I was screaming and bleeding, and he walked over and calmly reassured me with that voice, that soothing voice that assuaged the fears of so many patients and calmed so many children that were hurting. And I thought, well, if Dad isn't freaking out, I calmed right down. And then he took me by the hand and walked me across the street to the medical office building, closed for the weekend, of course, but he took out some keys and opened a door, and I thought, does Dad have one of those magic skeleton keys that open everything? But I'd never seen this place before, but he took me inside. We went down a dark hallway, up an elevator, and into the office he shared with several other surgeons, and he got right to work, turned on some lights, got out some equipment, cleaned me up, numbed me up, sewed me up, bandaged me up, handed me a balloon that said, "From your doctor for being good." And let me tell you, I was impressed. I thought, let's see other dads do that. And he would do that more, mostly in the kitchen at home after that. At least 3 times for me and once for Jim, maybe more, with his super deluxe surgeon's first aid kit that he quickly learned he needed. And we would also see what else he could do and how insignificant what he did to us was compared to what else he could do when he took us to work. This wonderful place with cartoon characters all over the walls and these little tiny babies, smaller than anything I'd ever seen. And he took me into surgery a few times and showed me what he could do. And I was fascinated with this place that made sick children well. And at home, I would go through his slides. You remember when that's how we stored images? So a lot of you do. A few of you don't. But I would hold them up to the light and see these strange-looking deformities and tumors, and then the after picture of a perfectly normal-looking kid. Wow. And just really impressed, and I was so proud of him. But, you know, his work was important, but it didn't completely define him. He was also, as I said, a dad, and he did dad things too. And as a dad, he was a teacher as well. As Jim mentioned, he used less than ideal situations to try to teach us life lessons, such as the time he took me to traffic court after I was chased down by Unit 59A, the Glendale Police Department's prized chopper. And the judge sentenced me to traffic school. And as I turned to leave, Dad said, "Your Honor, I have a suggestion." "Dad, what are you doing? We're done here." But the judge said, "I'm listening." Dad said, "When he's done with traffic school, how about he write a 500-word essay on what he learned and submit 1 copy to you and 1 to me?" And the judge said, "Doctor, I think that's an excellent idea." And he banged his gavel, and it was so decreed. I said, "Thanks a lot, Dad." And when I got home, I told Jim, who wasn't driving yet, "If you ever need to go to traffic court, take Mom." But, you know, he taught a lot of lessons along the way, but really the best lesson of all was having a front row seat to the remarkable life of this amazing man for 60 years. And I'll keep learning from him, even though he's gone. Just watching his life, his professional life, his personal life, and of course, his spiritual life, which was the foundation around which all other aspects of his life revolved. I'm going to miss him. I'm really going to miss him. Thank you.
Those were my little brothers. I'm proud of them too. Well, it was Dad who taught me about the 5 stages of grief. There's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So I was prepared for his death. I knew I'd go through all that. I was ready. But what I was not prepared for was reliving my entire life in times with him. And when I say reliving, I mean, he's there. It's like it's happening all over again. The sights, the sounds, the smells, his voice. He loved to teach me by showing. When I was 3, I had a Chatty Cathy doll, and her leg fell off. And he looked at that doll and saw how distressed I was, and he says, "Well, she needs to go to the hospital." So he took my doll to work. He came home with a Chatty Cathy doll with a cast on her leg. And he said, "Now we have to let her heal, and then we take the cast off, and she'll be all better." I didn't tell him until I was about 40 that I knew he had gone out and bought a new doll and just stuck a cast on it. But I got the lesson. When I was 9, he took me, just me, to Europe. We flew from Los Angeles to London. This is 1967. Took off, very luxurious on the airplanes. And everybody lit up their cigarettes, of course. So Dad took my air vent and aimed it at the smoker in front of me. Well, that guy was pretty irritated, and he and Dad actually had words about that. And Dad won because he was defending his little girl. And then he took out his dictaphone, and he dictated the first of I don't know how many hundreds of letters that he wrote to the airlines, telling them about the hazards of passive cigarette smoke, especially to children, and imploring them to prohibit smoking on airplanes. And there's not a time when I don't open my little air vent on a plane, I think about that. We got to London, and I had a stomach ache. So we checked into our hotel. We put our socks in the bidet to soak. Learned that from him, too. And then he pulled out some pills, and he gave me one, and I took it, and then he put one in a glass of water. And he took his gold cross pen, and he tapped the little pill in the water, agitated a little bit, and he said, now this is what's happening in your stomach. And when that pill dissolves, the pill in your stomach will be dissolved, and you will feel better. In Rome, it was really hot. And he had his, he always wore a suit. And so he had his shirt open, the tie down, he had his jacket over his shoulder, and we were walking down the street, and we came across a man in a wife beater, really sweaty, selling peaches out of a cart. And those peaches smelled so good. And the man smelled so, well, the combination smell is something that always comes back to me whenever I eat a really good peach, to this day. But we decided we would have a picnic. So we got some peaches, we got some bread, and then we went into a cheese store. Dad didn't know Italian. The cheese guy didn't know English. And the word that was bandied about was kilo, so we walked out of the cheese store with 2.2 pounds of cheese. And had a lovely picnic. He also took me to the opera in Rome, in the ruins, Aida. And I fell asleep before the end. So when I was about 30 for Christmas, I got the VCR of Aida so I could see how it ends. That was his present. But the most magical day, I think, of my entire life was another day with him and me, just us. We were at Mammoth, and it had been snowing all night the night before. I was about 10. Mom and Dad taught me to ski when I was 5. I'd never learned how to ski deep powder because we didn't really get much of that. But this day, there was deep powder, and we got over to Chair 5. It was perfectly clear blue sky, sunny. The sun was sparkling. It was like diamonds all over the snow. Beautiful snow, untracked. There was nobody else there but us. And Dad said to me, just point your skis straight down the hill, sit back, and don't worry because the snow will keep you from going too fast. It's so deep. And then make baby turns. And I did that. I made S-turns all the way down 5. And then he made figure 8s on top of my S-turns all the way down the face of 5. And we did it again, and again, and again, 4 times. Our figure 8s on the face of 5. We saw them every time we went up in the lift. That was sheer joy for both of us. And I'll tell you something, I think that's the one and only time that has ever happened. Because if you've ever been to Mammoth, there's no way there's nobody else on a hill with you. Dad smelled good. Whenever he came home from a trip or from work, he'd give me a big hug, and he smelled like Chanel aftershave. And sometimes he smelled like Chanel aftershave and cigarettes, because he'd been on a trip or at a meeting. And if I was in bed and he'd come home late at night, he'd come in my room and rub my back, and he would say, "You know your daddy loves you." And later I found out that he always referred to me as LP. And that stood for Little Precious. That's me, Little Precious. He was so proud of me, but never more than the day I got my law degree. Education was so important to him. And everyone who's standing before you today on this program, I listed their degrees because he would want to recognize all of the achievement that we have collectively over 100 years of higher education between us. If you look at my name, it says LPJD, which is what I became after I got my law degree. I was LPJD instead of just LP. He was proud of me and he loved me till the day he died. And I know that because whenever I would go and visit him in the last several months of his life, he would proudly introduce me to the other people in the room. Occasionally he introduced me as his daughter or Synth, but usually it was his mother or his sister, or recently I was his nephew. And I consider that to be a real amazing thing because you've already heard from 3 of his nephews who are 3 amazing people. So to be confused with them, I consider an honor. And he would say, he was sitting on his big easy chair and his eyes would sparkle when I walked in and he'd say, "It is so good to see you." And then he would say, and this was a week before he died, "Oh, honey, I love you so much."
I composed a poem about my brother-in-law, and it's called To Mort. You'll always be here with us, Mort. Even though we know you are gone, we all can feel your presence, and your legacy lives on. The world is a much better place because of the time you were in it. To help humankind was your mission every day, every hour, every minute. Without question, the medical profession is deeply indebted to you. As a pediatric surgery pioneer, your techniques were exciting and new. You shared your vast medical knowledge with professionals worldwide. Students and colleagues needing assistance would find you right there by their side. Many healthy adults today owe their lives to you. During catastrophic times, your expertise pulled them through. Your unique, life-changing abilities were offered universally, whether the children's families were poor, middle class, or even royalty. You regaled and entertained us with photos and stories you'd tell about interesting places you visited and family vacations as well. Conversing with you was a pleasure. You were warm and you showed that you cared. You would leave us with a great feeling because of those moments we shared. Your faith was a major part of your life. It helped you to conquer each day. Your strong beliefs carried you through when obstacles were put in your way. You adored your kids, but if they misbehaved, you performed your fatherly duty. The love of your life will be lost without you, the one you referred to as Cutie.
And when Jane asked me to do this, I was honored and humbled. After listening to all these speakers, I'm more honored and humbled. Recently, my wife Janie and I attended Cynthia's 60th birthday celebration. On the day we were to return to Pasadena, Janie mentioned she'd like to stop and visit Mort and Jane in Sun Valley. While visiting with Mort and Jane, I shared the influence that Mort had had on my life. I wanted him to know, and I wanted to thank him. Jane asked if I'd speak about those events and why they were so important to me. A little over 47 years ago, Cynthia and I became friends, and she invited me to go to a movie with her family. They were going to see Fiddler on the Roof. Sometime during the course of that evening, Mort mentioned that there was a group that met every Saturday morning at the church. He thought I might find it interesting. He invited me to attend. The following Saturday, I showed up at early church. I located the choir rehearsal room in the basement of the city church where the meetings were held. The attendees sat on wooden risers, the leaders in chairs down on the floor. It was a group of church elders and scholars who gathered to discuss topics of comparative religion, psychology, philosophy, theology, and matters of scientific importance. On this particular morning, Mort was one of the leaders. I don't remember the particular topic being discussed, but at length the conversation turned to child development. The topic was of interest to me because I'd just read a book by Eric Erickson in a child psychology course. I was so excited to share what I had learned. Now, at the age of 19, I discovered the value of memorizing ideas of other people, experts, and expressing them at the appropriate time. I could appear intelligent with little more effort than memorizing. It always seemed to impress my classmates. Well, I shared the quote I had memorized with this group, and a strange silence followed. Not the good kind where they were mulling over what I said, more like the embarrassing kind. Looking back, I realized that what I'd shared was really no more novel or exciting than the fact that the world was round. I looked around the room, and Mort was looking up at me. Our eyes met, and he wouldn't look away. He leaned forward, and somehow I felt the distance between us shortening. And he said to me, "Bob, what you said is important. What I'd really like to know is, what does this mean to you?" Well, I felt my face turn red. I wanted to turn time back to the moment before I'd opened my mouth. That wasn't going to happen. As I looked at Mort's face and into his eyes, I felt safe. Excuse me, I get choked up at times like this. I knew that whatever answer came out would not be wrong if I spoke my truth. I paused for a moment and shared what that quote meant to me and how it applied to what was being discussed. As I spoke, Mort relaxed back into his chair, his head slowly nodding. He thanked me and the discussion continued. Early church ended. Everyone filed out the door. All I wanted to do was go up to the youth center and meet my friends. As I approached the exit, Mort was waiting. My thought was, will this never end? But that door was the only way out of the room. I figured my best play was to step up and thank Mort for inviting me. Mort beat me to the mark. He stepped over and he placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Bob, I've never looked at that subject quite that way before. Thank you for sharing. I hope you continue coming to early church." A couple of weeks later, while attending early church, I became bored with the subject being discussed. At this time in life, I like to carry books around with me, mostly to impress others, sometimes to read. I opened the book I had with me and spent the remainder of this session reading. As I was leaving, Mort pulled me aside. I knew I had been caught. I felt sheepish. I had exhibited a bovine complacency toward the morning's discussion. He looked down at me and said, "Bob, I have yet to meet anyone in life who I could not learn something from." What I'd learned from these lessons, that Mort had learned the art of not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I came to these meetings with an agenda. I wanted to impress others. Mort very skillfully threw away that agenda and taught me to trust in my own intellect and who I was. Well, another few weeks passed, and another day at early church. The discussion went on. I think I lost my place. another few weeks passed, another day at early church, Mort called me over again. It had been a good, in-depth discussion. I offered my meager quotes and citation. I was feeling pretty good about myself. Mort seems exacerbated, but gently so. He expressed more compassion than disappointment. He looked down at me and said, "Bob, you can spend your life digging shallow wells and never find much of anything. Take the time and dig a bit deeper. You might find what you're really looking for." Now, I'm reaching back 47 years and reliving all of these memories, but there were more. There were many more. As I remember Mort, he was always teaching and always learning. But these 3 moments are highlights for me. Why are they so important? Well, my goal in high school was to graduate, nothing more. It was the end of the 60s. We turned into the tumultuous 70s. All I wanted to do was get away from the boarding school I'd been placed in and experience the life I'd missed out on. Fortunately, the school I went to had low enough academic standards to give me a diploma, or they just wanted to get rid of me. Lacking guidance, lacking goals, there were many forks in the road I could have followed. Many of my friends followed some of those paths to catastrophic ends. Not to be melodramatic, but there are watersheds in each of our lives. Fortunately, Mort was there at the crossroads for me. He was a man I respected. More importantly, he was a man who respected me. He offered me the fatherly guidance I needed at that time in my life. I found that when I was with Mort, our roles were constantly shifting. One moment, Mort was a teacher, the next a student. I saw something in him I'd never experienced before in my life. Someone who cared about what I had to say. Someone who valued me. I've watched the Wooley family over the past few years. What I observed, I equate to a book I recently read called Walking Each Other Home. It's a beautiful book about aging and the end of life. What I witnessed was a family walking Mort home. They set a beautiful example of loving kindness and compassion. In closing, I want to share one more experience. A couple of weeks ago, Janie and I were invited to attend the Yoga Expo at the Pasadena Convention Center. We checked out a class called Face Yoga. The presenters weren't more than a couple of minutes into the demonstration when Janie and I turned to each other and said, "Mort." Mort, I believe, actually created face yoga. I remember one particular trip with the Wooleys and their camper out into the desert. On the first evening there, Mort had us all gather around after dinner and participate in his form of face yoga. These were face exercises designed to eliminate frown lines, crow's feet, and beautify one appearance without surgery. Well, I think it worked. When Janie and I visited Mort a couple years ago in Sun Valley, I did not see an old man. The memory I have of that visit is of his sparkling eyes and his loving smile. This is a cherished gift I will carry the rest of my days.
For those of you who knew Mort, and those of you who have listened to all these reminiscences, it's obvious that we're here to honor a man, not as a pioneer pediatric surgeon, which he was, but as an extremely capable, caring, and compassionate gentleman. I first met Dr. Wooley during an interview when applying for a position as a pediatric surgical fellow at Children's Hospital Los Angeles almost exactly 50 years ago. I was indeed fortunate to be that surgical fellow in the years 1970 to 1972, a long time ago. Dr. Wooley, while not the first LA surgeon to practice children's surgery, was recognized as the pioneer pediatric surgeon in California. I believe he was the first Los Angeles surgeon to have experienced a formal 2-year period of pediatric surgical training, which he obtained, as you've heard, at Harvard Boston Children's Hospital. Pioneer surgeons practicing in this new surgical subspecialty frequently were required to survive and thrive in a less than friendly political environment. They needed to have superb knowledge of their field, to be technically superior, have a dedicated focus, and above all, to have a resilient and patient personality. Mort had all of these. But many of the early pediatric surgeons also had reputations for also being, shall we say, overly aggressive and not very diplomatic. Those of you who knew Dr. Wooley personally know that he was the antithesis of that latter type of personality. His intellect and skills were clearly recognized, but it was his integrity, honesty, and above all, dedication to his patients and their parents that were most obvious. These qualities and his patient, compassionate nature are also what made him an excellent teacher and a mentor for residents and young budding surgeons. So you see, I was extremely fortunate to have been his trainee and subsequent young colleague at this time in my professional life. Although Mort was a dedicated physician and teacher, he was just as committed as you have seen to his family and his faith. As you know, he was an avid outdoorsman and family man. But what you probably don't know was he was so committed to physical conditioning that he made his daily surgical rounds, and not only did he not use the elevator between the 7 floors of Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, but he made all the residents and staff do likewise. He insisted this was to keep up his and our stamina. However, we had questions as to the value if we had been up all the previous night in the operating room or with a serious patient. To his credit, I must say we never had any cardiac arrests among the staff, despite the fact that he always took the stairs in two-step bounds. He never chided us for being slow, but as you see, he would stand there with a smile like he had on his face in this picture, and he would look at us and smile and not say anything, but we knew he was talking about our inability to keep up with his pace. Mort was a man who lived his faith at a time in the early 70s when self-indulgence was widely practiced. He did not smoke or drink. He believed in and practiced marital fidelity and was always concerned about the welfare of others. He lived his commitments to the fullest. As a teacher, he was excellent. He also contributed much to the field of pediatric surgery with his clinical research projects. He published many papers and had numerous presentations at local and national meetings. He also strongly encouraged us as surgical fellows to participate in these same efforts. I was honored to have participated in several of these studies. I might also point out that though he was well recognized in this area and well thought of, he was humble. And I remember in particular his telling us about one of his early, most referenced clinical surgical papers that contained a conclusion that he now felt was misleading and probably wrong. He said he regretted its existence since it had his name on it. He was truly humble and willing to admit his own shortcomings. He always emphasized our responsibility as physicians to the parents of our patients who were giving us their most valuable possession for our care in the time of these parents' greatest anxiety. This was clearly documented or demonstrated by the love and appreciation shown by his patients' parents. He was a perfectionist to a degree that he would pursue any and all evidence relating to a patient's illness. Those teaching rounds I referred to always began in the radiology suite with the on-call radiologist reviewing the most recent studies on all our pediatric surgical patients, not just his patients. It served as a great example of appropriate surgical care and as a teaching tool. But you have to remember that the X-ray suite was on the second floor, and we had to run up all those stairs to get to see our patients on the intervening 5 floors and complete our rounds. I believe this did result in a good surgical education, but I also suspect that we, whether intended or not, were among the most physically fit surgical residents anywhere. I was invited to join the staff at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, on the completion of my surgical fellowship in 1972. I now had Mort as a senior colleague. A young surgeon who has just finished his training somewhat resembles a rookie starting a professional sports career. That is, you have the talent and the training, but your lack of experience makes a trusted mentor extremely helpful in difficult or unusual situations. As has been pointed out, Mort was never intrusive, but he had an open door policy and was readily available for discussions and would even offer to assist, if requested, during a difficult surgical procedure. A mentor also facilitates professional growth by opening new avenues that not previously encountered by a surgical trainee. A few months after beginning as a full-time staff surgeon, Mort called me to his office and made what I thought was an unusual request. He had been contacted to be an expert medical witness for the prosecution in a Northern California medical malpractice trial. He told me his schedule was too full and asked if I would be willing to substitute for him. I was honored, but initially reluctant, and had all kinds of excuses. As you must recognize, almost all physicians avoid courtroom appearances for any reason. Mort was very understanding about my reluctance, but explained his requests as follows. The patient was a preschool-aged child who had obviously been medically mistreated both during and in the immediate postoperative period, after what should have been a routine surgical procedure. This resulted in a subsequent severely handicapped life for the child. He felt this child and his parents deserved a competent surgical consult for proper legal representation. That was typical of Mort's concern for assuring appropriate surgical care for all children. I reluctantly agreed to become involved, and fortunately justice prevailed. This was just another opportunity for growth and did result in a good outcome for the family, but also gave me more invaluable experience because of Mort's urging. Most pediatric surgeons who follow an academic-oriented career will make one or more geographic moves. These decisions are important and obviously are made much easier when you have the presence of a nationally recognized surgeon as a mentor. When I left the security of my Children's Hospital of Los Angeles position, cut the umbilical cord, so to speak, Mort gave me excellent advice and encouragement, which I knew I could rely on because of his reputation. I have truly appreciated this opportunity today to share with you my experience with Dr. Wooley as a teacher, mentor, friend, and colleague. You can be assured that all the subsequent surgical residents and medical students who had the privilege of being taught and befriended by him feel about the same with their experiences. I would like to say one other thing. I've always said that a teacher has the closest link to immortality. That is, that when you teach someone something, they use it and they pass it on to their students, even though they may never know where it came from. What you do lives on. Mort was an outstanding influence on all of us. And Dr. Morton Wooley, your legacy lives on.
It was the mid-1960s. I was in my early teens when I made my first visit to the Wooley home in Hillcrest Drive. I was introduced to 3 children, Doug, Jimbo, and their daughter Cynthia. And soon after, a German Shepherd ran up, and all the family called her Cindy. I remember asking my father, why would they have a daughter named Cynthia and a dog named Cindy? My dad told me, I don't know, but I strongly urge you never to mix them up. A few days just ago, I sought clarification from Cynthia, who said, yes, we had a German Shepherd named Cindy. We got her from the Goulards, who had named her Cindy. When the dog passed away, they called us and said Cindy had died. Dad, Mort, was the saddest of all of us. You see, Dad loved that dog. Dad always loved children and dogs, and children and dogs love Dad. Like everyone, I consider myself very fortunate to have known Mort and Jane. They both had a profound effect on my life. Jane, because she was an exemplar for what women could become in a male-dominated profession. It was because of Dr. Wooley that I decided to be a medical doctor. Mort would talk enthusiastically about the profession with a clear emphasis on its meaningful opportunities. When I was a college student, Dr. Wooley invited me to sit on a Sabbath School panel, and I was to represent a young adult's perception on issues, the issues I can't remember. In preparation for the discussion, he asked me to submit my CV. I had to ask, what is a CV? After he told me curriculum vitae, I pretended to nod knowingly and then quickly looked it up. At the meeting, Dr. Wooley read to the audience excerpts from my CV. He made it sound so much better than I actually deserved, and this was my first lesson on how to buff your CV. It was Mort and Lou Smith that convinced me to pursue an academic career at Loma Linda. Up to that point, my career aspirations was to become a medical doctor, work 6 months a year to earn just enough money to ski the other 6 months. Mort, himself an avid and excellent skier, quickly disabused me of that fantasy. Mort took me on a tour of his library in their recently remodeled Flint Ridge home. In his library, the rusty orange cover of the bounded journals of pediatric surgery were behind the open door. Mort told me that upon moving the books into his newly furnished library, the interior decorator gasped and said the offensive color did not go with the theme of the house and they must be removed now. Mort magnanimously compromised and put them behind the door so the casual observer couldn't see them. Major compromise. When Dr. Lee was a visiting professor on the Loma Linda campus, I, a board-certified urologist, went to his lecture on cryptorchidism. He repeatedly referred to the stubborn and offending organs as gonads. My thoughts on his pronunciation, well, if you're Mort Wooley, you can call them whatever you want, and for that day, they will all be gonads. After all, think about it. When they are removed, they are gonads. The story's true. Dr. Wooley's contribution to Loma Linda cannot be overestimated. His well-deserved reputation as a healthcare leader, combined with his undiluted loyalty to Loma University School of Medicine, Dr. Wooley was a major and positive force in Loma Linda's journey. His advice and guidance for building our own children's hospital when he was Surgeon-in-Chief at Children's LA proved to be crucial to our success. The lives of millions of children in the Inland Empire have been dramatically and forever affected since the Loma Linda Children's Hospital opened more than 25 years ago. When I think of the more than 12,000 graduates of our now 110-year-old School of Medicine at Loma Linda, Mort Wooley's faith in God and Loma Linda, his remarkable clinic and academic leadership accomplishments has been one of Loma Linda's most precious gifts. Thank you.
would invite you to see the words on your program and join us as we sing a song about amazing grace. And when you think about all the characteristics that come together in the stories that we've heard about this man, grace seems to be one of those remarkable things.
Not much left to do or to say, just sing a good song together, huh? Sing it loud. Da, da. Always get the wrong harmonica
This
first.
has always been a problem.
We're singing Amazing Grace. Which
It
harmonica
goes
is
from
it?
D to G.
It's in D.
D to E.
That doesn't
Is it in
sound right.
D, right?
D to E, yeah.
Why don't we just sing the song? Ready?
Let's do it.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that throwed my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Moments like this make us keenly aware of three things: what was, what is, and what will be. What was? As we sat and listened to the stories, I found myself wishing I had known him even better. To me, he was tall and stately, and yet humble. I listened to the stories and thought of what it must have been like for an intern to see a senior resident and over time come to know that he was from Loma, and be able to say, he is so much nicer than the others. In fact, he's the nicest man I've ever met. What a beautiful, precious memory. I thought about, Dr. Jane, what you shared with me. That time when identical twins were born with esophageal atresia, which if it wasn't addressed and repaired, would mean their life would end very soon thereafter. And I thought of this tall, caring physician performing surgery, caring for those twins himself, nursing them himself, skipping Mammoth, which, as I listened to stories, realized was a major sacrifice. To be present and to make sure they were okay. And I thought of the reality that 40 years later, at his retirement celebration, those twins came and helped him celebrate. That's what was. A lifelong career of caring for people, caring for children, the most vulnerable among us, caring for those of whom Jesus said, this is what my kingdom is made up of. A lifelong connection that has already been noted with the little ones among us. That's what was. I thought of Dr. Jane saying that when Dr. Morton would see that they were going somewhere and that there were children at that location, he'd say, well, why don't you pick up something for the children? I thought of that. I thought of the stories that you told of his hobbies, his love of basketball, his love of skiing, of the outdoors. I thought of his daughter being a little precious. That's what was. A life lived fully, abundantly. That's exactly what Jesus came to provide. He said very simply, I am come that they might have life and they might have it to the full. So it seems to me that the fingerprints of Jesus were on this life in many different ways. And because of that, when we think of what was, we can think of it with true gratitude. It's true, the feelings are bittersweet. With the sweet, the gratitude, there is the bitter of the loss. Moments like these remind us of those three things, beginning with what was. But then we're left with what is now, with what draws us together to this place. We're left with the reality of the ancient wise man's words that appear in the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. This then is a time to weep, a time for tears. Oh, there's laughter mixed in with it. And there will be more as family and friends gather together and tell and retell the stories. But make no mistake about it, tears may be the most appropriate language at a time like this, when we're left with what is. Also, we ought not make any mistake about the fact that the friends of Jesus, the children of God, have wept throughout time. As you trace the story of God's people in this book, you will see them time and again banding together, bonded together by their tears. The sorrow that comes whenever we stand at the grave of a loved one. Tears. The wise man is not just saying it because it's poetic. He's saying it because it's true. There's a time for tears. There's a time for mourning. Indeed, this is such a time. But even through the tears, remember the life. The life that has been spoken of so well here today. It made me think of these words penned by the psalmist. I think Dr. Morton Wooley's life could be captured in these words. Psalm 92, verses 12 through 15. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, proclaiming, the Lord is upright, he is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him. I was especially caught by those words. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green. Seems to me that's the testimony of this life, a life well lived. So that even when there are tears with what is, they are mixed with gratitude and hope. So moments like this bring us face to face with what was, the sometimes misty watercolor memories of the way it once was. They also bring us face to face with what is, the reality of our grief here and now. But there's a third reality, not just what was and is, but what will be. Every friend of Jesus who faces the finitude of life clings to the promise of what will be. I find it particularly meaningful in the words of the Apostle Paul, words that he penned to his friends at the church in ancient Philippi when he wrote this, "But our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body." With those words, Paul is capturing the essence of what he in other places calls the blessed hope. That promised return of Jesus, that promised establishment of the kingdom of God. Jesus himself spoke of it, his last night on earth, surrounded by his disciples, knowing in their faces that they could sense the darkness that was coming, and the anguish of his soul, he nevertheless spoke to the anguish of their soul and said, "Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Since he uttered the promise, that promise has echoed and reverberated in the heart of every believer, and no time more clearly than at moments like these. So we come not only to face and think about what was and what is, but we come to express our hope and our confidence for what will be. I don't know that there can be a greater gift given to a spouse, given to a family, given to a community, and given to patience than the gift of a life well lived, of a practice of medicine well executed, and of somebody who loved his Lord and points us in the direction of Jesus and his promise. It is to that, Dr. Jane, that we cling today. Would you pray with me? Gracious God, we have heard the stories. They've warmed our hearts, brought smiles to our lips, and yet at the same time they brought tears to our eyes. Lord, what was beautiful indeed, and it makes what is bittersweet. But we cling to, we hold to the promise of what will be, and pray that you would comfort and sustain our souls from now till then. In the name of Jesus, amen. I'd like to invite you to remain seated. Kimo Smith is going to play a well-known piece called "When the Saints Go Marching In." At the end of that piece, he will continue playing, and at that time, the family will be ushered out. You are invited to join them for a reception in the Collins Auditorium of the Drayson Center. If you don't happen to know where that is, the address and a map is on the back of your program. It will be there that you will have ample opportunity to greet the family, to share stories, to give them your comfort and hope. So after we've enjoyed "When the Saints Go Marching In," the family will be ushered out, and you can follow.